JT Wistersill of Locked On Utes. Let's start here. There has been a terrible, awful disservice that the Big 12 commissioner has brought down on every single school in the conference not named Utah. And that disservice is the 2024 Utah football schedule. We talked about this as soon as it came out. You were the first host I talked to about this because it was so blatantly insane. And today, it feels maybe even more insane than it did then. Just the ease of what Utah gets. And before we even dive deeply into every matchup or some of these matchups, what is your reaction? Not the reaction when it came out 4 or 5 months ago, but your reaction as of late August going into football season with the shake that Utah got from Brett Yormark and company.
I'm incredibly excited because I think Utah has a schedule that sets them up very nicely to make a run, not just at the Big 12 title, but obviously if you win the conference, then you get to go on and compete for a national championship in the college football playoff, which Utah has never gotten to make the playoff before. This schedule absolutely sets up for Utah to do it. They're not the only one in this conference with an easy schedule. I will say, I think Kansas and Kansas State, when you look at when the schedules all came out, 24/7 Sports put out a list of the top 5 easiest schedules. Utah, Kansas, and Kansas State were all listed on there. Big reason for that, they don't have, like, Utah doesn't see Kansas, Kansas State, and vice versa. Kansas and Kansas State don't have to play against Utah too. So yes, this schedule is very kind to Utah. I think there's no way around it, right? I mean, their toughest road game is by far at Oklahoma State. Their second toughest road game, in my opinion, right now is probably at UCF, but there's a lot of new parts with the Knights, right? Like, I like KJ Jefferson. He's not coming off the greatest season. Like, how's that going to go? Transfer quarterbacks don't always work out as much as we all get fired up about our addition and what they were able to do. Like, so we'll see there. And there's a lot of new pieces on that defense as well. So how's that going to gel? Like, but to me, there's just not really a, outside of the game in Stillwater, there's not a super tough road game on Utah's schedule. So they get a massive favor there. They also catch a lot of the teams in the conference that I'm not trying to dump on BYU. BYU's not projected to be great this year. Like, so that's Houston is not projected to be great this year too, right? Utah gets Baylor at home this year, even though I guess that's a non-conference game. So my bad for bringing that one up, but it's still weird to think that's a non-conference game. But there's just a number of games on the schedule where you look and you're like, okay, like Utah gets to Arizona State this year, right? The toughest stretch of their season by far to me is when they play Oklahoma State early. And then the very next week you play Arizona. I think Fafita's a top 10 quarterback. He has a chance to be in New York for the Heisman for me. So that's not going to be an easy game too. But most of the toughest games on Utah's schedule, and Iowa State, right? Iowa State is I wouldn't want to go up and have to take on the Cyclones, but they're coming to us. And it's very hard to win inside Rice-Eccles Stadium. So that's another game where it favors Utah. This schedule was a nice gift for Utah from the Big 12. I'm not sure how it worked out or like all the things that factored into it, but it definitely is a schedule that sets Utah up for success. And it reminds me a lot of a schedule they've had in the past in which they nearly made the college football playoff.
You know, we talk a lot about parity in the Big 12 and how week in and week out, you're going to get a matchup that could sneak up on you. And usually it's because you go from playing Oklahoma State one week to Cincinnati the next, and then right back to a road game against Kansas State. And you think, oh, well, shoot, you know, this every other week we get a real gauntlet of a game. But Utah has a stretch here against schools that not only missed a bowl game last year, but frankly weren't very good at all. Arizona State, TCU, Houston, BYU, Colorado in consecutive weeks. That's the easiest stretch in the Big 12, no doubt. And you have the stretch against Southern Utah, home game against Baylor, at Utah State. Those 3 games should all be automatic wins for Utah. And again, you mentioned the outliers, the games that might be tightly contested. Where I'll start when it comes to those tight games, the Arizonas, the Iowa States we mentioned, does Utah ever lose at home? Is there any way Utah loses at home this season?
There's a way, because if you look at what happened last year, who'd they lose to at home? They lost to Bo Nix's Oregon. Oregon, obviously, a superior team. Last year's Oregon team than what I expect this year's Arizona team to do. But when Utah also almost lost at home back in 2022, it was with an unreal performance from Caleb Williams. Noah Fafita is not Caleb Williams, but he is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Yeah. He is capable of going off. That, to me, is the most likely Utah home loss. I think Rocco Beck's a good quarterback, too, so you look at that one late in the season. Another one where I see a chance at it. But, I mean, just to answer the question, like, no, this is a Utah team that has only lost one true home game since 2018. That was the one I mentioned to last year's Oregon team in a game in which I think it's fair to mention Cam Rising didn't play it. So they also didn't have their starting quarterback against a top 5 team in the country at the time, because that Oregon team, I think that was before they'd lost to Washington, but either way, a really good team. So Utah should not lose at home. They have a great home field advantage. It's tough to play in that altitude. You see teams will jump out on a lead on Utah, and then they'll often fall behind because it's just tough to keep up that same level of consistency. When you get fatigued, you make mistakes. I mean, look at the way the last year's Florida team, and I know the Swamp is a much different environment, but that first game for Florida, I mean, it was brutal out there. So Utah's very good at home. They don't have a tough home schedule. I would be surprised if they lost a home game this fall.
When you say the tougher stretch is the Oklahoma State and Arizona, those two games back to back, or Iowa State and then on the road against UCF, keeping in mind that one of those is pretty early in the season and the other are the last 2 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely. Yeah, that's where it's nice that you don't have. You mentioned earlier that stretch where you, like, some teams will play Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and someone else.
Which do you think they're tough? Which one's tougher? Based on where they fell, at least, which of those stretches is? And I say stretch, I mean it's 2 games. Is it tougher to go Oklahoma State, Arizona back to back, or is it tougher to go Iowa State, UCF back to back?
To me, it's Oklahoma State and Arizona because I just think those are better teams. I just don't look like by the end of the season, could Iowa State and UCF surprise us? For sure. I don't know if I see both of them surprising us this year, because this is just the nature of the Big 12, right? We're like, one team's going to have a good year. Not every team can have a good year. So I think one of those 2 teams will click. One of them will be very disappointing in that stretch too. So I just think earlier in the season, those Oklahoma State and Arizona both ranked inside the top 25. Iowa State, UCF were not, and I think for a reason too. So I do think that Oklahoma State and that Arizona game are the toughest stretch there too. I will give a little bit of, I just want to say this for the end of the season stretch. I do think you can rope in that Colorado game. I know most people would look and be like, there's no way that's crazy, but I'm a big fan of matchups. And I think this Utah secondary should be good this year, but I think Shedeur Sanders is maybe the best quarterback in the country. So if he's having himself a game, if that offensive line is even improved, that game is in Boulder, I could see that being Coach Prime's big win this year with Shedeur Sanders going off. And when Utah's lost games in the Cam Rising era, it's been to great quarterbacks. You look at what really good quarterbacks, right? Mentioned Bo Nix, Anthony Richardson's gotten his number 2, Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA. That was another really good college quarterback. So these are guys usually this Utah team doesn't go on the road and just lose to complete no names, unless it's like at Oregon State, but that was another place where they just don't lose at home very often to me too. So I think that Colorado game is another sneaky one, but even with that game roped in there, I just expect this Utah team to be rolling, and there's so many they're better in all the other phases that quarterback, if Shedeur's having a game in the secondary, I think for Utah still playing well, shouldn't be a massive issue to me, but definitely one to keep your eye on. But to answer your original question again, to me, Oklahoma State and Arizona are the 2 best teams Utah plays on their schedule. They are in back-to-back weeks. That is the stretch, that little 2-game stand that has me most concerned.
Coming up, the Pac-12 sucked, right? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Sometimes, by a miracle that's far above my control, the Texas Rangers will win a baseball game. And it makes me happy when that happens. If you're listening from Utah, who do you root for? You don't want to be a Rockies fan, you know? A couple of California teams out there. You got the Bees in Salt Lake City. Might as well root for the Rangers, and sometimes they win. Right now at FanDuel, they have something a little different for you. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of an NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's right. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, and right now you get that kind of offer at FanDuel.com/locked on. To download America's #1 sports book, FanDuel.com/locked on. Visit it today.